Hi, friends. I am so excited to finally be able to talk to you about some chromaticism. So, prior to this class, you've studied diatonic chords, diatonic harmony. Well, today we get to dig in with our very first chromatic chord. It's a very common type of chord that can happen, and it is called a secondary dominant. To get the conversation started, I want to dig into some music. Let's take a look. What you see here in example 1 is the first 8 measures of the second movement of a Haydn symphony. What we're going to do is take a look at the harmony in this excerpt and find the chromatic chord. So we start first with what the key is of this excerpt. Given the key signature and that it starts with the C in the bass, a pretty good guess would be C major. Assuming we're in the key of C major, which has no sharps or flats, we now scan the score to try to find the chromatic chord. Do you see it? It's here. This chord has an F sharp in it in the violin parts. F sharp is not in the key of C, so that makes it a chromatic chord. What we see when we take an inventory of these notes is that we have D and F sharp. D is in the lower strings and the F sharp is in the violins. If we had to write a lead sheet chord symbol for this, I would call it a D major chord. Now we don't have A, but that's okay. We can omit the fifth sometimes and still hear a triad implied. In this case, D and F sharp are the root and the third of the D major chord. Well, friends, D major has no place in C major, right? It's a chromatic chord. So what we want to do is take a look at this chord's relationship to the chord it resolves to. In this case, all parts are going to G. So we can assume that the implied chord it goes to is a G chord. Now, G is a chord that is diatonic in the key of C. What Roman numeral would we give this chord in the key of C? It is the dominant. It is the 5 chord in the home key of C. But now what I will invite you to do is to think about the relationship of the D major chord to where it goes, to G. For a moment, can you think about what the relationship between D major and G major is? D major's relationship to G is that it is the dominant of G, or in other words, the 5 of 5. This, my friends, is a secondary dominant. Now, before we get too far in the weeds here, I want to take a listen to this excerpt so that you can hear the sound of this secondary dominant, the D major chord. Let's listen. The way we label this chord is going to look like this. That's the nomenclature. So the top Roman numeral is the 5, meaning the dominant. The slash means of. And the next Roman numeral in this symbol refers to the chord that is being tonicized. In this case, G major, which is 5 in the tonic key of C major. So we would call D 5 of 5 in the key of C major. There are a few terms to keep in mind. So these chords we see that function as applied or secondary dominants are part of a process we call tonicization. All this means is the process of making a non-tonic chord sound like a temporary tonic by playing its 5 chord or its dominant immediately before. As in this Haydn example, we are playing the 5 that exists in the key of G. So we are tonicizing, for a moment, the key of G. You can tonicize any major or minor chord. You cannot tonicize diminished triads because we would never have a diminished triad be a tonic chord. Think about it. We usually have music either in major or minor keys, and tonic triads, one chords, will be either major or minor and no other quality. The last term I want to give you right now is the term secondary leading tone. What a secondary leading tone refers to is the leading tone of the key that is being tonicized. Take again our example of tonicizing G. The secondary leading tone is F sharp. So we would say that F sharp is the secondary leading tone of this secondary dominant. We will not confuse it with the regular or primary leading tone, which in the key of C would be B natural. One final point. The quality of secondary dominants themselves will always be a major triad, or if it's a 7th chord, it will be a major minor 7th chord. Why? Because when we're in a key, 5 or 5/7 is typically either major triad or a major minor 7th chord. In fact, you cannot have a secondary dominant that is not one of those two qualities. But as we already saw in the Haydn example, they do not have to be complete triads or complete major minor 7th chords. We'll stop there for now, and we'll pick up in a moment looking at secondary dominants in a symphony movement by Beethoven.